The day Harriet Owens tried to sell her wedding ring for feed grain, Franklin Drake knew something had to change. He had been watching her for weeks now, this pale ghost of a woman who drifted through Park City, Utah like smoke threatening to disperse on the wind. She had lost weight she could not afford to lose, her dresses hanging loose on a frame that had once been full of life and curves. Her husband had been dead for 8 months, killed when his horse threw him during a storm, and in those 8 months Harriet had been slowly disappearing. Franklin had known Thomas Owens, not well, but enough to nod to on the street. They had both worked cattle in the territory, though Thomas had managed to scrape together enough to buy a small ranch on the outskirts of town. It was nothing grand, just a modest house and enough land for a few dozen head of cattle, but it had been theirs. Now it was just hers, and she was losing it piece by piece. The general store was quiet that autumn morning in 1878, dust motes floating in the shafts of sunlight that cut through the windows. Franklin had come in for tobacco and maybe some hard candy if he felt extravagant. Instead, he found himself frozen near the pickle barrel, watching Harriet pull off her ring with trembling fingers. "Please, Mr. Henderson," she was saying to the shopkeeper, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know it is not much, but the gold must be worth something. I need feed for the cattle or I will lose them all before winter." Henderson, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. He was a decent man if prone to putting profit first. "Mrs. Owens, I cannot give you what this is worth. I am not a jeweler, and you might need this, you might want to keep it." "I have no use for sentiment now," Harriet said, and the deadness in her voice made Franklin's chest constrict. "I need my animals to survive the winter. That is all that matters." Franklin moved before he had fully thought through what he was doing. "I will buy the feed grain." Both Harriet and Henderson turned to look at him. Franklin pulled his hat from his head, suddenly aware of how forward he was being, how inappropriate this might seem. But he pressed on anyway. "Mrs. Owens, I have been meaning to talk to you about your ranch. I heard you might need help with the cattle before the snow comes." Harriet's green eyes, which had been so lifeless a moment before, sparked with something that might have been anger. "I do not need charity, Mr. Drake." So she knew his name. That was something, at least. "It is not charity," Franklin said quickly. "I am between jobs right now and I need work. I thought perhaps we could come to an arrangement. I help you get your ranch through the winter and you pay me in spring when you sell the calves." It was a transparent lie. Franklin had steady work at the Silver Creek Ranch 5 miles outside of town. But he said it with enough conviction that Henderson looked convinced, at least. Harriet's jaw tightened. "I cannot pay you anything now." "I do not recall asking for anything now," Franklin replied. He turned to Henderson. "Put whatever Mrs. Owens needs on my account. I will settle up at the end of the month." "Mr. Drake, I cannot accept this," Harriet protested, but her fingers had already closed around the ring, holding it tight against her palm. "Then do not accept it," Franklin said. "Think of it as a business investment. I help you keep your ranch running, and come spring, we split the profit from the calf sales. Fair partners." He extended his hand, knowing she would be raised with enough propriety to take it. Her hand was small and cold in his, her grip weak. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her skin had taken on an almost translucent quality. She was not eating enough. She was working herself to death trying to manage a ranch alone. "Partners," she agreed finally, her voice reluctant. Henderson loaded up a bag of feed grain, and Franklin carried it out to Harriet's wagon. The vehicle was as worn as everything else about her life now, the wood weathered and one wheel sitting slightly crooked. Her horse was a decent enough mare, at least, still healthy and well tended. Whatever else Harriet was neglecting, she had not neglected her animals. "You did not have to do that," Harriet said as he loaded the grain into the wagon bed. "I know," Franklin replied, "but I wanted to." Why? It was a fair question. Franklin considered his answer carefully as he brushed grain dust from his hands. "Because Thomas was a good man, and he would not want to see you fade away to nothing. And because I have two good hands and a strong back, and it seems a waste not to use them where they are needed." Harriet climbed up onto the wagon seat, her movements stiff and tired. "I am managing fine on my own." "I am sure you are," Franklin said, though they both knew it was a lie. "But even the strongest among us need help sometimes. There is no shame in it." She did not respond to that, just clicked her tongue at the mare and started the wagon rolling. Franklin watched her go, noting the way she held herself so rigidly upright, as if afraid that if she relaxed even a fraction, she might crumble entirely. He had told his boss at Silver Creek Ranch that he might need some time off. He had been saving his pay for months now with no particular goal in mind, just the vague notion that he might want to start his own spread someday. He was 26 years old enough to know his own mind, and he knew that he could not stand by and watch Harriet Owens work herself to death. The next morning, Franklin rode out to the Owens ranch just after dawn. It was a beautiful property, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. The house was small but well built, and there was a decent barn and a few outbuildings. The cattle were scattered across the near pasture, maybe 40 head, mostly Herefords with a few Longhorns mixed in. Harriet was already up, trying to mend a section of fence that had come loose. She looked up at the sound of his horse, and for a moment something like panic crossed her face. "Mr. Drake, I was not expecting you so soon." "Call me Franklin," he said, swinging down from his horse. "And I figured the sooner I start, the sooner we get this place ready for winter." "I have not prepared accommodations for you," Harriet said, flustered. "I did not think you would truly come." "I can sleep in the barn," Franklin said with a shrug. "I have slept in worse places, believe me." He could see her struggling with propriety, with the strangeness of having a man on her property in her barn. But necessity won out over concern for appearances. She nodded stiffly. "Very well. The barn has a loft. You are welcome to it." They worked separately that first day, Harriet clearly not comfortable with his presence yet. Franklin spent the morning checking the fence line, finding and marking the places that needed repair. There were more than he had hoped, evidence of months of deferred maintenance. In the afternoon, he started on the repairs, working steadily while the autumn sun beat down on his back. Harriet brought him water at midday, carrying a tin cup and a jar. She did not speak, just set them on a fence post and walked away. But it was something, an acknowledgement of his presence, of his help. By the time the sun began to set, Franklin had repaired about a third of the damaged fence. His shoulders ached in the good way that came from honest work, and his hands were blistered despite the calluses he already had. He put his tools away in the barn and was surprised to find a plate of food waiting for him on a hay bale. Biscuits, beans, and a slice of ham. Simple fare, but more than he had expected. He ate in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. The cattle lowing softly to each other, the chickens clucking in their coop, the wind rustling through the tall grass. It was peaceful here, he thought. A good place. A place worth saving. That night, lying in the loft on a bedroll he had brought from town, Franklin thought about Harriet. She could not have been more than 25, he guessed, though the grief and hardship had aged her. He remembered seeing her in town before her husband died, laughing at something Thomas had said, her face bright and alive. He wanted to see her laugh like that again. The days fell into a pattern. Franklin would wake before dawn and work until the sun set, repairing fences, checking the cattle, fixing the roof on the barn where it had started to leak. Harriet worked alongside him sometimes, but more often she kept to her own tasks, tending the garden, caring for the chickens, cooking meals that she left for him but never shared. It was almost a week before she spoke to him beyond the bare minimum of necessary communication. He was mucking out the barn when she appeared in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun. "You are wasting your time here," she said, her voice tight with some emotion he could not name. Franklin leaned on his pitchfork and looked at her. "How so? This ranch cannot be saved." "I am merely delaying the inevitable. Come spring, the bank will take it anyway." "Why would the bank take it?" Harriet laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because I am behind on the loan Thomas took out to buy the property. Because I cannot make the payments alone." "Because a woman has no business trying to run a ranch by herself." "Says who?" Franklin asked. "Says everyone," Harriet replied. "Says the banker who looks at me with pity every time I come to town. Says the neighbors who keep suggesting I sell and move back east. Says common sense." Franklin set down the pitchfork and walked closer to her. She did not back away, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched into fists. "You want to leave?" he asked quietly. The question seemed to surprise her. She blinked, and for the first time since he had arrived, he saw actual emotion flicker across her face. "No," she whispered. "This is my home. Thomas and I built this together. I cannot just abandon it." "Then we will not let you lose it," Franklin said simply. "You cannot promise that." "Maybe not, but I can promise to do everything in my power to help you keep it." Harriet looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. Then, without another word, she turned and walked back to the house. But the next morning, when Franklin came down from the loft, he found breakfast waiting for him. Not just a plate left on a hay bale, but a proper meal set out on the porch of the house. And when he looked up, he saw Harriet watching from the window. It was a start. As October deepened into November, the work became more urgent. There was so much to do before winter set in properly. Franklin worked from dawn to well past dusk most days, determined to get the ranch into shape. He repaired the rest of the fence line, reinforced the barn, cut and stacked firewood until there was enough to last through even the harshest winter. Harriet slowly began to emerge from her shell of grief. She started joining him for meals, at first eating in silence, then gradually beginning to talk. She told him about her life before Thomas died, how they had met in Illinois and married young, how they had dreamed of making a life in the West. She told him about Thomas's laugh, his terrible singing voice, the way he had made her feel safe and loved. Franklin listened, never interrupting, letting her grieve in words since she had been holding it inside for so long. And slowly, he began to share pieces of his own story. How he had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 brothers. How he had headed west at 18 looking for adventure and found mostly hard work and harder living. How he had always dreamed of having a place of his own but had never quite managed to scrape together enough to make it happen. "Why did you really come here?" Harriet asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, and she had wrapped herself in a shawl against the chill. "I told you," Franklin said. "I needed work." "That is not true, and we both know it," Harriet said. "Mr. Henderson's wife told me you have a steady job at Silver Creek. So why are you really here?" Franklin was quiet for a moment, considering how much truth to tell. "Because I could not stand to watch you disappear." Harriet turned to look at him, her eyes wide. "You do not even know me." "No," Franklin agreed, "but I would like to." The words hung in the air between them, full of implication. Harriet looked away first, but Franklin thought he saw the faintest hint of color in her pale cheeks. "I am not ready," she said softly. "For whatever you think this might be, I am not ready." "I know," Franklin said, And I am not asking you to be. I am just here, Harriet, for as long as you need me." It was the first time he had used her given name, and she did not correct him. The first snow came in mid-November, dusting the valley in white. Franklin and Harriet worked together to bring the cattle closer to the ranch, where they could be fed and monitored more easily through the winter. It was hard, cold work, but Harriet never complained. Franklin noticed that she was eating more now, that some of the color had returned to her cheeks. She was still too thin, but she was no longer fading away. They moved the cattle in groups, Franklin on his horse and Harriet on her mare, working in tandem to guide the stubborn animals down from the high pastures. It was during one of these drives that Franklin saw Harriet truly smile for the first time. A calf had gotten separated from its mother and was bawling pitifully, running in circles. Harriet dismounted and walked calmly to the calf, speaking to it in a low, soothing voice. The calf settled almost immediately, and she led it back to its mother by simply walking beside it. "You have a gift with them," Franklin said, impressed. "Thomas used to say the same thing," Harriet replied, and for once there was no pain in her voice when she mentioned her late husband, just a gentle fondness. "He said I could gentle the wildest creature. He was right." They got the last of the cattle moved just before a major storm hit. Franklin had been worried they would not make it in time, but Harriet had pushed them hard, and they finished with hours to spare. That night, as the snow began to fall in earnest, Harriet invited Franklin into the house. "It is too cold to sleep in the barn tonight," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "There is a spare room. It was going to be for when we had children, but we never got the chance. You should use it." Franklin knew what it cost her to make that offer, to let him into the private space of the home she had shared with Thomas. "Are you sure?" "Yes," Harriet said firmly. "I am sure. You have done so much for this ranch for me, it is the least I can do." The spare room was small but comfortable, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the valley. Franklin set his few belongings down and joined Harriet in the main room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. They ate dinner together, a hearty stew that Harriet had made, and for the first time the silence between them was comfortable rather than strained. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside it was warm and peaceful. "Tell me about your family," Harriet said as she poured coffee for both of them. "Your brothers, do you ever see them?" "Sometimes," Franklin said. "They are all married now, settled on farms back in Missouri. They think I am crazy for staying out west, chasing dreams that might never come true." "What dreams?" Harriet asked. Franklin wrapped his hands around the warm coffee cup. "A place of my own, not much, just enough land to run some cattle, a house to come home to, maybe a family someday." He paused, then added quietly, "Someone to share it all with." Harriet was quiet, staring into the fire. "Thomas and I wanted children," she said finally. "We tried for 3 years. I was finally expecting when he died. I lost the baby 2 weeks after we buried him." Franklin felt his heart break for her. "Harriet, I am so sorry." "I have never told anyone that," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Not even the doctor knew I was expecting. It was still early, but I knew. And then it was just one more thing taken from me." She started to cry then, really cry for the first time since Franklin had known her. He moved without thinking, crossing the room and pulling her into his arms. She stiffened at first, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his shirt as months of grief poured out. Franklin held her, one hand gently stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. He thought about how fragile she felt in his arms, how much strength it must have taken for her to keep going all these months, carrying all that pain alone. When her tears finally subsided, Harriet pulled back, wiping at her eyes with embarrassment. "I apologize. I should not have broken down like that." Do not apologize, Franklin said firmly. You have been carrying too much for too long. You are allowed to grieve. I miss him, Harriet whispered. I miss him so much. But lately I have been feeling so guilty because there are whole hours now where I do not think about him, where I am just living, just working, and he does not cross my mind. It feels like I am forgetting him. You are not forgetting him, Franklin assured her. You are healing. There is a difference. Thomas would not want you to spend the rest of your life drowning in grief. How do you know what he would want? Harriet asked, but there was no anger in the question, only genuine curiosity. Because any man who loved you would want you to be happy, to live a full life, even if he could not be part of it. Harriet looked at him, something shifting in her expression. You are a good man, Franklin Drake. I am just a man, Franklin replied, trying to do the right thing. That night marked a change between them. Harriet stopped holding herself at such a distance, stopped treating Franklin like a hired hand or even just a business partner. They became friends, talking late into the evenings after the work was done, sharing stories and dreams and fears. December brought bitter cold and more snow. Franklin and Harriet worked together to keep the cattle fed, breaking ice on the water troughs, hauling hay from the barn to the pasture. It was exhausting work, but they fell into an easy rhythm, anticipating each other's needs, working as a team. One morning, Franklin woke to find Harriet already in the barn, trying to help a cow that was having trouble calving. He quickly joined her, and together they worked for hours in the freezing barn, finally bringing a healthy calf into the world as the sun rose over the mountains. They were both covered in blood and other fluids, exhausted and freezing, but when the calf struggled to its feet for the first time, they grinned at each other with pure joy. We did it, Harriet said, laughing. You did most of it, Franklin replied. I just followed your lead. We make a good team, Harriet said, and the way she looked at him made Franklin's breath catch. They cleaned up and went inside for breakfast, both of them giddy with the success of saving the calf. As they ate, Franklin found himself studying Harriet's face. She looked so different from the hollow ghost he had first approached in the general store. There was life in her eyes again, color in her cheeks, strength in her movements. She was beautiful, he realized, not in spite of the hardship she had endured, but because of how she had survived it. Why are you looking at me like that? Harriet asked, catching him staring. Franklin felt his ears grow hot. Sorry, I was just thinking about how much has changed since I first came here. Everything has changed, Harriet agreed softly. I have changed because of you. No, Franklin said. You changed yourself. You did the hard work of choosing to keep living. I just gave you a little help with the ranch work. Harriet reached across the table and took his hand. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact, and Franklin felt electricity run through him at her touch. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, she said. You reminded me that life could be more than just surviving, and I need you to know how grateful I am. Franklin turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. I did not do it for gratitude, Harriet. I know, she whispered. Why did you do it? Because from the moment I saw you in that store trying to sell your wedding ring, I could not stop thinking about you. Because you haunted my dreams. Because I saw a woman worth saving, worth knowing, worth loving. The last word slipped out before Franklin could stop it, but he found he did not want to take it back. Harriet's eyes widened, her breath catching. Franklin, I cannot. Thomas has only been gone 8 months. It is too soon. People would talk. Let them talk, Franklin said. I am not asking you to forget Thomas or to stop loving him. I am not asking you to rush into anything. I am just telling you the truth. I care about you, Harriet, more than I probably should. Harriet pulled her hand back, standing up from the table. She walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered valley. Franklin waited, his heart pounding, wondering if he had just ruined everything. "I care about you too," Harriet said finally, her voice barely audible, "and that terrifies me. I swore I would never love anyone again, that I could not survive losing someone else I cared about. But you have been so patient, so kind, so constant. And I find myself thinking about you, wondering what you are doing, looking forward to seeing you each morning." "I do not know what to do with these feelings." Franklin stood and walked over to her, careful not to touch her, giving her space. "You do not have to do anything with them right now. We have time, Harriet, all the time you need." She turned to look at him, tears shining in her eyes. "What if I am never ready? What if I can never move past this grief?" "Then I will wait," Franklin said simply. "I will wait as long as it takes. And if you ultimately decide that all we can ever be is friends and business partners, then I will accept that too. But I will not stop caring about you, Harriet. That ship has already sailed." A small smile tugged at Harriet's lips despite her tears. "You are too good for me, Franklin Drake. I disagree completely. But I am happy to spend the rest of my life trying to prove myself worthy of you, if you will let me." Christmas came, and with it a brief thaw. Franklin rode into Park City to pick up supplies and found himself selecting a few small gifts. A new shawl for Harriet in a deep green that would complement her eyes, peppermint candy, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. He felt foolish and excited all at once, like a schoolboy with his first sweetheart. When he returned to the ranch, he found Harriet had spent the day cleaning and decorating. She had brought in pine boughs to make the house smell festive and had even baked cookies, filling the air with the scent of cinnamon and sugar. "I thought we should celebrate," she said, almost shyly. "It has been so long since I felt like celebrating anything. But this year, I have something to be grateful for." They exchanged gifts on Christmas Eve. Harriet gave Franklin a new pair of gloves she had knitted herself, working on them in the evenings when he thought she was just sitting by the fire. The stitches were neat and even, the wool thick and warm. "These are perfect," Franklin said, genuinely touched. "Thank you." When he gave Harriet her gifts, she unwrapped each one with careful attention, as if they were precious treasures. She draped the shawl around her shoulders immediately, and Franklin was gratified to see that the color did indeed make her eyes even more brilliant. "You have already given me so much," Harriet said. "You did not need to give me anything else." "I wanted to," Franklin replied. "I wanted you to have something just for you, not for the ranch or for survival, something to bring you joy." Harriet opened the book of poetry and read a few lines, then looked up at him with shining eyes. "Will you read to me?" she asked. So they sat by the fire, and Franklin read poetry aloud while Harriet listened, wrapped in her new shawl, eating peppermint candy. It was one of the most perfect evenings of Franklin's life, simple and sweet and full of unspoken promise. As January arrived and the new year of 1879 began, Franklin and Harriet settled into a comfortable domesticity. They worked together during the day and spent their evenings by the fire, reading or talking or simply sitting in companionable silence. Franklin was careful not to push, to give Harriet the space she needed to process her feelings, but he noticed the small changes. The way Harriet's hand would linger on his shoulder when she passed him, the way she smiled more readily now, laughed more often, the way she started to talk about the future not with dread but with cautious hope. One evening in late January, a particularly fierce blizzard trapped them inside for 3 days. They passed the time playing cards, telling stories, and working on small projects. Harriet mended clothes while Franklin carved small wooden animals, a hobby he had picked up as a boy. "Tell me about your dreams," Harriet said on the 3rd day as they sat by the fire listening to the wind howl. "Your real dreams, not just the practical ones." Franklin set down the horse he had been carving and considered the question. I dream of building something that lasts, he said slowly. A ranch that I can pass down to my children, that they can pass down to theirs. I dream of sitting on a porch when I am old and gray, looking out at land I helped shape, cattle I helped raise. I dream of having someone beside me through it all, a true partner in every sense of the word. That is a beautiful dream, Harriet said softly. What about you? Franklin asked. What do you dream of now? Harriet was quiet for a long moment. I dream of being happy again, she said finally. Really, truly happy without guilt or grief overshadowing everything. I dream of this ranch thriving, of feeling proud of what I have built, and I dream of not being alone anymore. She looked at Franklin as she said this last part, and the meaning was clear. Franklin felt his heart race. You do not have to be alone, he said quietly. Not if you do not want to be. I know, Harriet replied. I am starting to understand that. The storm finally broke on the fourth day, leaving everything covered in a fresh blanket of white. Franklin and Harriet went out together to check on the cattle and were relieved to find them all safe, huddled together in the lee of the barn where the wind had been less fierce. As they walked back to the house, Harriet slipped on a patch of ice. Franklin caught her before she could fall, his arms wrapping around her waist. For a moment, they stood there, close enough that Franklin could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath in the cold air. Harriet, he said, her name a question and a plea all at once. She answered by rising up on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, Harriet clearly out of practice and nervous. But Franklin responded gently, cradling her face in his hands, trying to pour all of his feelings into this one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Was that all right? Harriet asked, suddenly uncertain. That was more than all right, Franklin assured her. That was everything. Harriet smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and lit up her whole face. I think I am ready, she said, not to forget Thomas or to pretend he never existed, but to live again, to love again, with you. Franklin felt joy surge through him, so intense it was almost painful. Are you sure? I do not want you to feel rushed. I am sure, Harriet said. You have been so patient with me, Franklin. You have given me time and space and understanding, but I do not want to wait any more. Life is too short and too uncertain. I want to be happy. I want to be with you. Franklin kissed her again, deeper this time, and Harriet responded with growing confidence. They stood there in the snow, wrapped in each other's arms, and Franklin thought that this moment was worth all the waiting, all the uncertainty, all the hard work. Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened. They were more openly affectionate now, holding hands as they worked, stealing kisses when the mood struck them, sitting close together in the evenings. Harriet bloomed under the attention, becoming more vibrant and alive with each passing day. But they both knew that their happiness existed in a bubble that would eventually have to face the scrutiny of the outside world. That day came in early February when a neighbor, Mr. Carson, rode over to check on Harriet after the storms. He was clearly surprised to find Franklin there, and even more surprised by the easy familiarity between them. His eyebrows rose when Harriet introduced Franklin as her partner, both in the ranch and in life. Mrs. Owens, are you certain this is wise? Carson asked, his tone carefully neutral. Your husband has been gone less than a year. People will talk. Let them talk, Harriet said, echoing Franklin's words from months before. I am tired of living my life according to what other people think is proper. Franklin has helped me save this ranch, and more importantly, he has helped me remember how to live. I will not apologize for that. Carson looked between them, then sighed. I suppose you know your own mind, And I will say, the place is looking better than it has in months. If Drake here is the reason for that, then I suppose he is doing right by you." After Carson left, Harriet turned to Franklin with a determined expression. "We should go into town," she said. "Together. Let people see us, let them talk. I will not hide what we have." Franklin was proud of her courage, even as he worried about the judgment she might face. But if she was ready to face the town, then he would stand beside her. They rode into Park City together the next Saturday. Franklin noticed the stairs immediately, the way conversation stopped as they passed. Harriet held her head high, her hand tucked into the crook of Franklin's arm. At the general store, Mr. Henderson greeted them with a knowing smile. "Mrs. Owens, Mr. Drake, good to see you both." "Good to see you as well, Mr. Henderson," Harriet replied smoothly. "I wanted to thank you for your kindness last fall. Things have improved considerably since then." "So I see," Henderson said, his eyes twinkling. "Will you be settling your account today, Mr. Drake?" "I will," Franklin said, pulling out the money he had saved. It was most of his savings, but he did not care. It had been worth every penny. As Franklin counted out the bills, the door opened, and a severe-looking woman entered. Franklin recognized her as Mrs. Pemberton, one of the town's most prominent gossips. Her eyes widened when she saw Harriet and Franklin standing so close together. "Harriet Owens," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I heard rumors, but I did not believe them. Tell me it is not true that you have taken up with this cowboy so soon after poor Thomas's death." Franklin felt Harriet stiffen beside him, but when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "Mr. Drake has been helping me run my ranch, yes, and we have developed feelings for each other. I see no reason to hide that or to be ashamed of it." "But it has been less than a year," Mrs. Pemberton protested. "It is unseemly. What would Thomas think?" "Thomas would want me to be happy," Harriet said firmly. "He would not want me to spend the rest of my life in mourning, letting our ranch fall apart and wasting away to nothing. Franklin has reminded me that I have a life to live and I intend to live it." "Well," Mrs. Pemberton sniffed, "I suppose you always were rather unconventional. I just hope you know what you are doing." "I do," Harriet said. "For the first time in months, I absolutely do." After Mrs. Pemberton left in a huff, Henderson chuckled. "That woman has never been happy unless she has something to disapprove of. You did well, Mrs. Owens. You too, Drake." They finished their shopping and headed back to the ranch. On the ride home, Harriet was quiet and Franklin worried that the confrontation had upset her more than she was letting on. "Are you all right?" he asked as they neared the ranch. "I am better than all right," Harriet said, turning to him with a brilliant smile. "For the first time since Thomas died, I feel like myself again. Like Harriet, not just the grieving widow, and it is all because of you." "You did the hard work yourself," Franklin reminded her. "I just walked beside you." "You did so much more than that," Harriet said. "You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You saw me as a person, not just a tragic figure to be pitied. You reminded me what it felt like to be alive." That night, after they had cared for the horses and checked on the cattle, Harriet asked Franklin to join her on the porch despite the cold. She wrapped herself in the green shawl he had given her and took his hand. "I have been thinking," she said, "about the future, about what happens next. The spring sale is coming up in a few months. If we can get a good price for the calves, I should be able to catch up on the loan payments and have enough left over to make it through next year." "We will get a good price," Franklin assured her. "The calves are healthy and strong." "We have done good work here, Harriet." "We have," she agreed. "And I want to keep doing it, together. I know we have not talked about specifics, about what this relationship means or where it is going, but I want you to know that when I think about the future now, you are always in it." Franklin brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. When I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you. I love you, Harriet. I have loved you for months now, even when I knew it might not be returned." "It is returned," Harriet said softly. "I love you too, Franklin. I did not think I could love again after losing Thomas, but you have proven me wrong. My heart has more room than I thought." They kissed under the cold stars, and Franklin thought that this moment was worth every hardship he had ever endured. This woman, this place, this life they were building together, it was everything he had ever wanted. As winter slowly gave way to spring, Franklin and Harriet made plans. They would sell the calves in May, pay off the loan, and use the rest to buy more breeding stock. Franklin had officially left his job at Silver Creek Ranch, making the Owens Ranch his sole focus. He and Harriet worked together seamlessly now, a true partnership in every sense. In late March, Franklin rode into town alone to pick up some supplies Harriet needed. While there, he made another stop, one he had been planning for weeks. At the small jeweler's shop, he looked at rings, simple bands that would suit Harriet's practical nature. "Looking for anything particular?" the jeweler asked. "An engagement ring," Franklin said, "for a very special woman." He selected a simple gold band with a small emerald, the green stone reminding him of Harriet's eyes. It was not extravagant, but it was beautiful and well made, and he thought she would love it. Now he just had to find the right moment to ask. That moment came in mid-April, on a day so beautiful it seemed impossible that winter had ever existed. The valley was coming alive with green growth, the cattle were thriving, and Harriet was singing as she worked in her garden. Franklin watched her from the porch, this woman who had transformed from a fading ghost into a vibrant, vital force. She looked up and caught him staring, smiling at him with such open affection that it made his chest tight. "Are you going to help me plant these vegetables, or are you just going to stand there looking handsome?" she called out. Franklin laughed and joined her in the garden. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, their hands moving in the rich earth, planting seeds that would feed them through the next winter. It felt symbolic somehow, this act of faith in the future. "Harriet," Franklin said, sitting back on his heels, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. Franklin pulled the ring from his pocket, and Harriet's eyes widened. "I know we have not been together very long in the traditional sense," he said, "but I have known since the day I saw you in that general store that you were someone special. Someone worth fighting for, worth believing in. These past months with you have been the happiest of my life, and I cannot imagine spending my future with anyone else. Harriet Owens, will you marry me?" Harriet's hand flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling, that brilliant, life-filled smile that Franklin loved so much. "Yes," she said, laughing through her tears. "Yes, of course I will marry you." Franklin slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, not caring that they were both covered in dirt, that anyone passing by might see them. She was going to be his wife and nothing else mattered. "When?" Harriet asked when they finally broke apart. "When should we get married?" "Whenever you want," Franklin said. "Tomorrow, next month, next year. I am a patient man." Harriet considered this, absently turning the ring on her finger. "I want to wait until after we settle with the bank," she said. "I want to start our marriage free of that debt, free of that worry." "Is that all right?" "That is more than all right," Franklin assured her. "We will do this however you want to do it." They told no one about the engagement yet, wanting to keep it private just a little longer. But Franklin noticed that Harriet wore the ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress, close to her heart. The calf sale in May went better than either of them had dared to hope. The calves were healthy and well-fed, thanks to the hard work Franklin and Harriet had put in over the winter. Buyers competed for them, driving the price up higher than it had been in years. When the final tally was counted, Harriet had enough to pay off the entire remaining balance on the ranch loan, with money left over for new breeding stock and repairs. She walked into the bank with her head held high, Franklin at her side, and paid off the loan in full. The banker, who had been so condescending to her in the past, looked shocked. "Mrs. Owens, this is quite unexpected. How did you manage this?" "Hard work," Harriet said simply, "and having the right partner." She looked at Franklin as she said this, and he saw the pride and love in her eyes. Outside the bank, Harriet threw her arms around Franklin's neck and kissed him right there on the main street of Park City, not caring who saw. "We did it," she said, laughing. "The ranch is truly ours now. No more debt, no more fear of losing it. We actually did it." "You did it," Franklin corrected. "You had the strength to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. I just helped a little." "You did much more than help a little," Harriet said. "You saved me, Franklin, in every way a person can be saved." That evening, back at the ranch, Harriet took the ring from the chain around her neck and slipped it onto her finger where it belonged. "I am ready to tell people now," she said. "I am ready to be your wife." They were married in early June of 1879, a simple ceremony in the small church in Park City. Harriet wore a new dress, pale blue like the summer sky, and carried wildflowers from the meadow near their ranch. Franklin wore his best suit and could not stop smiling. Some of the townspeople still disapproved, still thought it was too soon after Thomas's death. But many more came to celebrate with them, including Mr. Henderson and his wife, and several of their neighbors who had seen the transformation in both Harriet and the ranch. Harriet had visited Thomas's grave the morning of the wedding, bringing fresh flowers and spending some time alone. When she returned, her eyes were red but peaceful. "I told him about you," she said to Franklin. "I told him that I was moving forward but would never forget him. And I think, wherever he is, he understands. He would want me to be happy." The wedding ceremony was short and sweet. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Franklin kissed Harriet with all the love and hope he felt for their future. She was his wife now, his partner in life and love and everything in between. They held a small celebration at the ranch afterward, their neighbors bringing food and music. As the sun set over the valley, Franklin and Harriet danced together on the porch, swaying to the fiddle music and the sound of their friends' laughter. "Are you happy?" Franklin asked, holding her close. "Happier than I ever thought I could be again," Harriet said. "You kept your promise, Franklin. You reminded me what living meant. You gave me back my life." "We gave each other a life," Franklin corrected. "A life worth living." Their first year of marriage was filled with hard work and deep happiness. They expanded the herd, added more land, and made improvements to the house. Harriet proved to be just as capable a rancher as Franklin had always believed, and together they built something truly impressive. In the spring of 1880, Harriet told Franklin she was expecting a child. They had both been hoping for this, but Franklin had been careful not to push, aware of the baby Harriet had lost after Thomas died. But this time was different. This time, Harriet was healthy and happy, well-fed and well-loved, and the pregnancy progressed smoothly. Their son was born in October of 1880, healthy and loud and perfect. They named him Thomas Franklin, honoring both the past and the future. Harriet cried when they registered the name, grateful that Franklin understood her need to remember her first husband even as she built a life with her second. "He would have loved this," Harriet said, cradling their son in her arms. "Thomas always wanted children. I like to think he is watching over this little one." "I am sure he is," Franklin said, gently touching the baby's soft head. "And I promise to raise him to be a man worthy of both names." Their family continued to grow. A daughter, Grace, arrived in 1882, followed by another son, Daniel, in 1884. The ranch prospered under their careful management, becoming one of the most successful in the region. They hired hands to help with the work as the herd grew, but Franklin and Harriet remained intimately involved in every aspect of the operation. Through the years, Harriet never forgot Thomas. She kept a photograph of him in the house, and she told their children about him, about the man who had first brought her to this wild and beautiful place. But there was no pain in those memories anymore, only gentle fondness. Franklin never felt threatened by Harriet's continued love for her first husband. He understood that the heart had infinite capacity, that loving Thomas did not diminish what she felt for him. If anything, it made their love deeper, richer, informed by the knowledge of how precious and fleeting life could be. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Franklin and Harriet sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done so many times before. Their children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The cattle grazed peacefully in the valley, and smoke rose from the chimneys of the Hands bunkhouse. "You remember the day we met?" Harriet asked, her head resting on Franklin's shoulder. "I remember a woman trying to sell her wedding ring for feed grain," Franklin said. "A woman who was fading away, losing herself to grief." "I was dying," Harriet said quietly. "Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I had given up on everything except the bare mechanics of survival." "And now?" Franklin asked, though he knew the answer. "Now I am alive," Harriet said, lifting her head to look at him. "Truly, completely alive. I have a husband I love, children I adore, a ranch that thrives. I have a life full of purpose and joy. And it is all because you refused to let me fade away." "You were always worth saving," Franklin said, kissing her softly. "You just needed someone to remind you of that." "You did more than remind me," Harriet said. "You showed me, every single day, through your actions and your patience and your love. You gave me a reason to keep going, and then you gave me a reason to truly live." Their children ran up to the porch then, young Thomas begging his father to tell the story about the time he helped birth a calf in a snowstorm, Grace demanding her mother read her a story before bed, Daniel just wanting to be held. Franklin and Harriet separated to tend to their children, but not before exchanging a look of perfect understanding and contentment. Later that night, after the children were asleep and the ranch was quiet, Franklin and Harriet lay in bed together, Harriet's head on Franklin's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You ever regret it?" Harriet asked softly. "Giving up your savings, leaving your job, taking a chance on me?" "Not for a single second," Franklin said firmly. "You and our children, this ranch, this life we have built together, it is everything I ever dreamed of and so much more. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "I love you," Harriet said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them all those years ago. "I love you too," Franklin replied. "My beautiful, strong, resilient wife, my partner in everything." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, when one needed saving and the other needed purpose. Together, they had built something beautiful from the ashes of grief and loss, a love story that honored the past while embracing the future, a family that thrived on the foundation of hard work and devotion, a life that was full and rich and utterly worth living. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew tall and capable, taking naturally to ranch work and showing his father's patience and his mother's gift with animals. Grace inherited Harriet's determination and Franklin's kind heart, becoming a fierce advocate for the ranch hands and their families. Daniel, the youngest, had a quick mind and a love of books, often reading aloud to the family in the evenings. Franklin and Harriet aged together gracefully, their faces lined with years of sun and laughter, their hands calloused from decades of work. They added to the house over the years, building more rooms for their growing family and eventually for their grandchildren. Young Thomas married in 1902, bringing home a sweet-natured woman named Elizabeth who quickly became like a daughter to Franklin and Harriet. Their first grandchild, a girl they named Harriet after her grandmother, arrived the following year. Franklin would never forget the look on Harriet's face when she held her namesake for the first time, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "A whole new generation," she whispered. "Thomas would have loved to see this." "I think he does see it," Franklin said, putting his arm around his wife. "And I think he is glad you found happiness again, that you did not let grief consume you." Grace married a neighboring rancher's son in 1905, and Daniel surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Park City. All three of their children remained close, their families intertwining and supporting each other just as Franklin and Harriet had always done. On a warm evening in the summer of 1910, Franklin and Harriet celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a party, filling the house and yard with noise and laughter and love. As the sun began to set, Franklin took Harriet's hand and led her away from the crowd, back to their favorite spot on the porch. They sat in the rocking chairs Franklin had made years ago, watching the light fade over the valley they had worked so hard to preserve. 31 years, Harriet said, shaking her head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into Henderson's store and offered to help a desperate widow. And sometimes it feels like we have been together forever." "Both can be true," Franklin said, his hand finding hers automatically, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "We have packed a lot of living into these years." "We have," Harriet agreed, "and I am grateful for every moment, even the hard ones, because we faced them together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to their family laughing and talking inside the house. This was what they had built together, not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and resilience, a family that knew how to work hard and support each other through anything. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Harriet asked. "When you offered to help me?" "I said a lot of things that day," Franklin replied with a smile. "You said Thomas would not want to see me fade away," Harriet said, "and you were right. He would have wanted me to live, to love again, to be happy. It took me a long time to understand that, but you were patient with me." "You were worth the wait," Franklin said simply. "You have always been worth everything." Harriet turned to look at her husband, this man who had saved her life in every way that mattered. His hair was silver now, his face deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same warmth and kindness that had drawn her to him all those years ago. "You know what the best part is?" Harriet asked. "What?" "I am not done living yet," Harriet said with a grin. "We still have so many years ahead of us, so many grandchildren to spoil, so many sunsets to watch together." "At least a few decades worth," Franklin agreed, squeezing her hand. They were both in their 60s now, but they were healthy and active, still working the ranch alongside their children and hired hands. There was no reason they could not have many more years together, and Franklin intended to treasure every single one of them. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, young Harriet, their granddaughter, came out to the porch. She was 6 years old now, bright and curious and full of life. "Grandma, Grandpa, come inside. Papa says it is time to cut the cake." Franklin and Harriet stood, their joints protesting slightly but not enough to slow them down. They followed their granddaughter back into the house, into the warmth and light and love of their family. The cake was a beautiful creation, made by Grace, who had inherited Harriet's talent for baking. As Franklin and Harriet cut it together, their hands joined on the knife. Their children and grandchildren cheered. "Speech," Daniel called out, and the others took up the cry. Franklin looked at Harriet, who nodded for him to go ahead. He cleared his throat, suddenly emotional as he looked around at all these beautiful faces, this family they had created together. 31 years ago, I made the best decision of my life, Franklin said. I took a chance on a woman who was struggling, who had every reason to give up but refused to do so. Harriet, you have made me happier than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything. You gave me my life back, Harriet said, her voice thick with emotion. You reminded me what living meant, what loving meant. You saved me, Franklin, in every way a person can be saved. They kissed to enthusiastic applause from their family. And then the party continued, full of laughter and stories and the comfortable chaos of a large, loving family. Later, much later, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Franklin and Harriet lay together in their bed, hands clasped between them. I have been thinking, Harriet said softly, about that day in the general store, about how close I came to giving up completely. You would have found your way, Franklin said, though he was not entirely sure it was true. Maybe, Harriet said, but I am glad I did not have to do it alone. I am glad you were stubborn enough to see past my pride and grief. I am glad you refused to let me fade away. I could not have done anything else, Franklin said. Loving you was the easiest thing I ever did. Building this life with you has been my greatest joy. Harriet rolled toward him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. For your patience, your kindness, your love, for giving me a reason to keep living when I had forgotten how, for showing me that life could be beautiful again. Thank you for letting me, Franklin replied, for trusting me, for opening your heart to the possibility of love again, for being brave enough to choose life over grief. They kissed softly, tenderly, with all the love of their many years together. And as they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, both Franklin and Harriet felt nothing but gratitude for the path that had brought them together, for every moment of joy and sorrow that had shaped their shared life. The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of their family. Young Thomas proved to be as capable a rancher as his father and grandfather before him, and he passed those skills on to his own children. The Owens-Drake Ranch became known throughout Utah as a model of excellent management and fair treatment of workers. Franklin and Harriet lived to see their children grown and settled, their grandchildren thriving, and even the first of their great-grandchildren born. They worked the ranch as long as they were physically able, finally stepping back only when their bodies insisted they slow down. But they never stopped being partners. They still made decisions together, still walked the property together on pleasant days, still sat on their porch every evening watching the sun set over the valley they loved. On Franklin's 75th birthday in 1927, their entire extended family gathered once more. It was a massive celebration, with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filling every corner of the ranch. Franklin looked around at all of them, this legacy he and Harriet had built, and felt overwhelming pride and joy. "What are you thinking about?" Harriet asked, settling into the rocking chair beside him. She was 73 now, her hair pure white, her face deeply lined, but her eyes still sparkled with life and love. "I am thinking about how blessed I am," Franklin said. "How one decision, one moment of choosing to help a stranger led to all of this." "I was not a stranger," Harriet protested. "You knew my name." "Barely," Franklin said with a laugh. "But I knew your heart. I knew you were worth saving." "We saved each other," Harriet corrected, as she always did. "I gave you the family and home you always wanted. You gave me a reason to keep living when I had lost all hope." "We built this together, Franklin." "Yes," Franklin agreed, taking her hand. "Together, always together." They sat in peaceful silence, watching their family celebrate, listening to the laughter and music that filled the air. This was what it meant to have lived a good life, Franklin thought. Not wealth or fame or grand adventures, but love and family, and the quiet satisfaction of building something that would last beyond themselves. As the years continued to pass, Franklin and Harriet remained devoted to each other. When Franklin's health began to fail in his early 80s, Harriet was by his side constantly, caring for him with the same dedication he had once shown her. And when Harriet's memory started to fade a few years later, Franklin was there, gently reminding her of who she was, who they were together, never losing patience, never showing frustration. Their children watched their parents' devotion to each other with awe and appreciation, hoping to build marriages half as strong. The love between Franklin and Harriet had become legendary in Park City, a testament to the power of choosing life over despair, of opening one's heart to the possibility of second chances. On a quiet spring morning in 1935, Franklin and Harriet sat together on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both frail now, moving slowly, but they still insisted on watching the sunrise together whenever they were able. "Do you remember," Harriet said softly, her hand trembling slightly in Franklin's, "the day you asked me to marry you? In the garden, both of us covered in dirt." "I remember," Franklin said, his voice rough with age but still warm. "You cried and laughed at the same time." "I was so happy," Harriet said. "After so much sadness, I did not know what to do with all that happiness." "We figured it out," Franklin said. "We had a whole lifetime of happiness together." "Not long enough," Harriet said, tears beginning to fall. "A lifetime is not long enough when you love someone as much as I love you." "Then we will have to find each other in the next life too," Franklin said, lifting her hand to his lips. "I will look for you, wherever we end up. And I will know you by your beautiful green eyes and your stubborn determination and your kind heart. And I will know you by your patience and your gentle strength and the way you see the best in everyone," Harriet replied, "especially in broken widows who have forgotten how to live." "You were never broken," Franklin said firmly, "just hurt. And you healed yourself, Harriet. You chose to heal, chose to live. I just held your hand while you did it." They sat together as the sun rose over the valley, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Two people who had found each other when both needed it most, who had built a life and a legacy that would continue for generations, who had loved each other through every joy and sorrow life could offer. Franklin Drake lived to be 86 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep with Harriet holding his hand. Harriet Owens Drake followed him less than a year later, as if she could not bear to be parted from him for very long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, their headstones simple but meaningful, inscribed with their names and the dates that bookended their shared life. But their love did not end with their deaths. It lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the ranch that still bore their name, in the stories that were told about the determined cowboy who refused to let a fading widow give up on life, and the woman who chose to love again, despite her grief. In Park City, they became something of a legend, their story told to illustrate the power of compassion, the importance of second chances, the beauty of a love that heals rather than wounds. Young people would visit their graves, leaving flowers and asking for blessings on their own romances, believing that some of Franklin and Harriet's devotion might rub off on them. The ranch itself continued for generations, each new steward honoring the legacy of hard work, fair dealing, and devotion to family that Franklin and Harriet had established. The house was preserved and expanded, becoming a gathering place for the ever-growing family, a tangible reminder of what two people could build when they chose to face life's challenges together. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the valley in those familiar shades of pink and gold, family members would sometimes swear they could feel the presence of Franklin and Harriet, still watching over the land they loved, still devoted to each other even beyond death, their love a permanent part of the very earth they had worked and nurtured for so many years. Their story, the widow who was fading away and the determined cowboy who reminded her what living meant, became more than just a romance. It became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, to the healing power of love, to the importance of refusing to give up on each other or ourselves, even when darkness seems overwhelming. Franklin had seen a woman worth saving and refused to look away. Harriet had found the courage to accept help, to open her heart again, to choose life over the slow death of grief. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love story that transcended the individuals involved and became something greater, something that inspired and uplifted everyone who heard it. In the end, that was their true legacy, not just the land or the family or the material success, but the reminder that it is never too late to start again, that love can bloom even in the darkest times, that choosing to live fully and love deeply is always worth the risk. Franklin and Harriet proved that second chances are real, that grief does not have to be the end of the story, that with patience and compassion and determination, even the most broken among us can heal and thrive. Their love story ended not with death, but with a legacy that continued to grow and flourish, touching lives far beyond their own, reminding generation after generation that the human capacity for resilience and love is infinite, that we are never truly alone as long as we have the courage to reach out to each other, to see past the surface to the worth beneath, to refuse to let each other fade away into darkness when we could instead walk together toward the light.